let's move on and talk about debt. We are a society very much in debt. Not only are the individuals in debt, the entire nation is in debt, an overwhelming amount of debt, tens of trillions of dollars. We are people who do not take debt very seriously. But the Bible does take debt very seriously, and the general rule is that you lend but do not borrow. See, it's not that going into debt is wrong, but the way that it's viewed in the Bible, it is something that you would never want to do. It's almost like filing for bankruptcy. No one wants to file for bankruptcy, and if you are filing for bankruptcy, chances are you've made a misstep before you've gotten to that point. It's kind of the same way with debt. If you're going into debt, it should be because you have to, the image is always as the borrower being at a disadvantage to the lender. It's a circumstance that you should not put yourself in willingly. Are there instances where it's appropriate? Yes. Is it prohibited in the Bible? No, I would just say that it's discouraged in the sense that it's not good for you.
Well, the borrower is a slave to the lender. Mm-hmm. The minute you borrow money, by just morality in general and ethics in general, you're on the hook to pay that back, right? Yep. If you do not pay that back, then you are violating something that God would command you to do. So when you borrow money, you're obligated to pay it back. That creates a commitment that then ties you down to a certain extent, right?
Right.
And so, what I have always advised you all, and what I've always tried to live myself, is that, avoid debt if at all possible, because by doing so, you maintain your freedom. And if you will be willing to accept a lower standard of living, we talked about this in the other podcast, accept a lower standard of living and stay out of debt. By so doing, over time, you can raise your standard of living if you so choose without the debt. Dave Ramsey talks about this a lot. There's, people probably have differing opinions on Dave Ramsey, but he, if you want to listen to him on debt, he will show you how not getting into debt ultimately pays off because you're not paying all the interest, and how much more quickly you can become stable financially by avoiding that. Obviously, most people, their biggest debt is their house. If they own a house, it's become more challenging in the days that we live in even to buy a house. But certainly the more frivolous debt, credit card, I just heard, recently on the news that since COVID hit, our credit card debt has just skyrocketed because people being in financial difficulty. And so you don't want to be going into debt for things that you don't absolutely need. You need a roof over your head. We could look at the rent versus buy, if we want to get into the details. Yeah. But, I would advocate do not go into debt for anything other than a house. That's my personal position when it comes to just daily living. From a business standpoint, we have always tried to avoid debt. Now, I bought out my business partner recently. I had to take on some debt in order to do that. I didn't like it, but it's something that I needed to do in order to advance the business. And as long as I'm being careful with how I repay that debt, I think that's an acceptable thing. But the bottom line is, don't become a slave to your debts, which is essentially what you're going to do. Yes. If you borrow money. You probably can get by without whatever it is that you're going into debt for.
Right. If the question is, do I have to go into debt for this, then that should immediately cast that purchase into a critical light. Absolutely. You mentioned that you would only go into debt for a house or, buying out your business partner, something big like that. A lot of people would also say you can go into debt for a car. I understand that cars are quite expensive, but new cars are very, how do I say this? In terms of their utility, obviously they are extremely similar to used cars, and they are so much more expensive that I would say as a Christian, you need to think hard about buying a new car. It's easy to kind of rationalize it. It's like, oh, it's going to be in better shape and this and that and the other. But just really evaluate those claims carefully because, cars are pretty sturdy. They do last for quite a long time, and they do have problems pretty quickly. So just be sure to think hard about that.
Well, here's my practical advice on any kind of debt that you're going to take on. We'll just use the car example. If you say, well, I really need a new car, okay, but you don't currently have a note on a car, so you're not paying a debt. And so let's say it's going to be $500 a month. All right. Before you go out and buy that car, every month, take $500 out of your budget and set it to the side and say, okay, if I had a car note, this would be my payment. I'm going to take that out of my normal budget. And do that for at least 3 consecutive months so that you can feel what that payment is going to do to you if you incur it. After 3 months, you'll have $1,500 set aside,
right.
Which could be well on the way to securing the transportation that you need. And maybe if you do that for a year, you can go buy a car for cash.
Right.
And it's really delayed gratification that will get you to where you need to be.
Well, that requires a lot of discipline.
It does.
But I think that is a good thing to subject yourself to if you are considering putting yourself under a debt to purchase a car. And we're saying all of these things, like what really is the problem with debt? Like why are we being so critical of it? Well, first of all, there's the whole practical issue of the downward spiral when you're unable to pay your debts. And like, we're all pretty familiar with that. But I think that the reason the Lord resists it so much is because of the speculation into the future. I think this is the same reason that he resists us taking oaths. He says, don't take an oath by your head because you can't make one hair white or black. We are not the masters of reality. We don't really know what the future holds. I'll again refer to this Randy Alcorn book that I've been reading on money. He tells the story of a couple who went into debt for a really nice house, and they were intending on paying off the debt with 2 incomes. And then the woman became pregnant, and they realized that they were now between a rock and a hard place. Either they could both keep working their jobs and pay off the house, or they could violate, which would be a violation of their conviction to care for the kid at home, or they could get rid of the house and have one parent, probably the mom, stay home with the kid and have less income. Those are the kinds of inflexible positions you put yourself in when you go into debt. The Lord, he could call you to completely uproot and go somewhere else tomorrow. If you're surrounded by debtors, that's going to be more difficult than if you're not. So there's good flexibility, and there's a humility in it as well. I don't really know what the future holds.